Hey, so my name is Sonia. This is my first ever YouTube video, video in general. Um, so today we're going to talk about Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which was written in 1985. This is not a spoiler-free review. I cannot keep a spoiler-free if my life depended on it, so this is not a spoiler-free review. There's enough reviews out there that's going to kind of help you kind of decide if you want to read the book. It's a fantastic book. That's probably the most unspoiler thing I'm going to say in this whole entire video. First off, I kind of want to talk about the idea of women in this book. Obviously you start with the character of June, and it's kind of like her diary. Very much her diary about her going through this whole entire Handmaid's experience from beginning to end. She talks a little bit about her past and her mom and everything, but it's definitely a diary type book in some sort of way. You definitely get some inner dialogue, which really helps you kind of get into her character a little bit, because I don't know if anybody's watched the show that's watching this video, but the inner monologue definitely helps you kind of see where she's at, because when you're reading the book and she's being obedient, it kind of sounds like, oh, okay, so she's just gotten to the point where she is obedient. That's not the case. You have to really focus on the inner dialogue to see her frustration and her anger and everything. And a problem I had with this book is that you really don't get a timeline. So you don't understand, like, okay, so from this point to this point, like, how long has it taken to form the idea of Gilead? Because to me, Gilead's very, very extreme. It's a very extreme difference between what America was in 1985 to what Gilead's formed, which is a pilgrim type of philosophy, and it's a very eye for an eye. So it's a very old philosophy that I'm surprised, but because it's science fiction and it's a dystopian, obviously it's allowed, because, obviously they're not following, okay, like, obviously this would have to go through checks and balances and everything else. So it doesn't really explain, like, how would Gilead be formed if we looked at today's government in the United States. And that was a big problem I had with this book, because when you're looking at it, it's like, okay, we see Americans' government, we kind of see kind of Trump's views, which is when the show kind of was brought out, was when Trump was getting elected and everything, which I found very interesting. But you don't really see how it would be formed, which was really interesting in my opinion. The problem is we're dealing with a society that this could actually, in some ways, could happen. We still have a very male-dominated society where women, to me, are still not 100% equal, but I still at the same time don't think, oh, okay, we're going to do a 360 and totally go back to the Pilgrim Age, because in a lot of ways, we still depend so much on technology that I don't think, unless it was completely and totally necessary, that we would give up on technology. And it could happen. It seriously could. We could go into a blackout state, and that's it. But I don't think we would choose that in a lot of ways. So it's June's journey. It's very much June's journey. We first see her, like, running through the woods from the government, and you really don't understand why she's with her husband Luke and she's with her kid, and we don't really understand until you get further on in the book why they were even running. Like, are they fugitives? Like, what's going on? That's kind of the thing. And then the next kind of scene, or maybe a little farther out, is kind of her going into the school building where there's a bunch of other women They're already dressed in the red robes. They already have, they're already dressed as a handmaid. And then you see this woman that's kind of in like a military green, um, and she's called an aunt. And we find out very, very fast that June just got um, locked into being a handmaid. And of course, they're going to say that this was by choice, but it really is not. Um, it's really it's really forced upon. The situation why Gilead was even formed was that a certain amount of women can have kids and a certain amount of women cannot, which in today's society is pretty much true in a lot of ways. Pretty much what a handmaid is a surrogate for these women that cannot have babies, and they go to very rich gentlemen and women. They're their wives, and they pretty much perform a ceremony each month. It's called a ceremony, and they pretty much have sex, and they pretty much make the babies, and then they get pushed out to a new location, and then they do it all over again. So they spend, I'm thinking, kind of the amount of time, I'm thinking like a month or two. They don't really, again, time is not something that's really, I don't think, I've read a couple of Margaret Atwood's books. Time is not something she really focuses on. She focuses more on the idea of, okay, this is happening, but I'm not going to give you a time frame, which is fine, but if you're looking at the psychology of what's kind of going on in these people's heads, like I would have liked to have like, oh, this has been going on for like a year or two. Okay, I can kind of understand in like a year or two, like, yeah, they would be very comfortable. They would consider it normal by that point, even though they would still have objections. So we finally get to the commander and his wife, which is Commander Offred and Serena Joy, which if you've watched the show, this is I don't if you've read the book before you've watched the show, then it's gonna be a mixed opinion, because in the book they're way older than in the show. In the show, they're about Offred's age, which means like you could kind of understand Serena Joy's frustration about Offred being able to, be able to make a baby, and why her and her husband cannot. But in the books, I don't really get the frustration, because she is definitely out of, baby bearing age at that point. So it's like, why would you, minus the fact that you're, a lot, more sexier, you're definitely younger. It's kind of like, Cersei in Game of Thrones kind of dealing with the idea of Marcella coming into it. And then, of course, you have Daenerys. I'm learning a little bit of the plot for that show. But you kind of, I kind of get the motivation why she would be jealous of this woman, why she would treat this woman so horribly because of the jealousy. But at the same time, you get it definitely more in the show than you do in the books. The book. Because in the book, it's like, okay, yeah, I understand. Like, I have a younger woman kind of between my legs, um, kind of having sex with my husband, like when I'm right there, and she's younger than me, and, everything else. But they treat it, what pretty much happened to their last handmaid was she committed suicide. And you kind of get that haunting feeling throughout the amount of time that June is there. She's named Offred now, but I'm still gonna call her June because I've watched too much of this show and I'm so used to calling her June. But she's Offred when she's her handmaid name. So when you're like kind of Offred's always kind of like explaining the room and how dark it is and now there's only one window, and then that she can still see where the ceiling fan was, where the girl committed suicide. And it's a very haunting feeling. It's not something like, okay, and then she finally finds, some comfort. The girl left a few messages and stuff, and that found her comfort, but at the same time, you're still stuck in this white room, and you're still a handmaid, and it's still not a good situation. So, to the ceremony, which is, I'm thinking like the creepiest part of this whole situation is the fact that the ceremony is basically the wife, which would be Serena Joy in this case, and the handmaid's in the middle with her head kind of in her inner parts, and then you have the commander, and it's a creepy threesome is what it is. And I found it disturbing, but then I found it like you wouldn't have the commander and the handmaid by themselves having sex, because it doesn't keep it like, who knows if they're following the rules. The wife can at least be there like, oh, you looked at her that way, or you did this and you're supposed to do this. It keeps them liable to what they're doing. So that's like the important part of that. And then like you kind of get this feeling like in a lot of ways, and I feel like this is another thing that the show does really well that the book didn't do per se. And I think it's something to do with kind of like the age of the characters, because the commander in the show is a lot younger, so you can kind of understand why maybe, June can kind of play with his emotions a little bit, because, they're the same age, and they seem like they have some sort of the same intelligence level. And you can obviously tell that when they're playing Scrabble and stuff. Like, he kind of honors the way that June has her intelligence. And I'm not saying Serena doesn't. That's the part that we don't get kind of in the books. We kind of get some of her history. Like, she was on TV and everything, like, kind of talking about the situation. And then her husband kind of takes her role. But you kind of, in a lot of ways, don't get that level of intelligence like you do with June's character. I see Serena as a very intelligent woman, especially in the show. In the book, she was just kind of like, okay, this is kind of the situation I'm in. And a lot of why to have a child is to gain status. And if it's more to gain status for your husband, which kind of gains status for you in a little bit of a way, but it doesn't change the fact that you're still a woman in a very male driven society. It doesn't change it. It's you're pretty much, okay, you're my wife. I still like you. Obviously they don't really say it in the books, but you assume that Serena Joy and her husband don't have sex. You just kind of assume that, because there's a couple of scenes in the show. I'm trying not to spoil the show too much, just in case, because there is a few differences between the show and the books that kind of show the relationship between the commander and his Serena Joy way better than the books do. Because the book kind of shows them at a different age of time. It's like a very different feeling from, what we get from the show. So I don't want to try to spoil the show too much. But the problem is Nick's there. Let's get to the character of Nick. Nick is an eye. I'm just gonna pull that out there. He is an eye. He is pretty much spying on this family, making sure they're following all the rules, making sure the commander stays in check, but at the same time wants to get with this handmaid, Offred, and he's very lost. And he also, see, in the books, you can definitely tell he's about the same age as Offred. In the show, it's the same. They didn't mess with his age too much, but you can definitely tell the confusion between how Offred feels about um, Nick and how she's like, well, now I'm cheating on my husband, which she's been doing with the commander, but the commander, why she's cheating with the commander is for her safety. And the reason why she's cheating with Nick is kind of in a little bit of a love affair, which kind of messes Offred up. Like, why, I can't do this. I have a husband that might still be alive. In the book, we never know. We never know if Luke is alive or dead. I'm not going to ruin that for you, but in the book, yeah, we don't know. We kind of assume, he got shot and everything. We kind of assume he's dead. And we're taking this from Offred's point of view. We're not taking this from anybody else's. So she's going to assume that, yes, he is indeed dead, which means technically she's not cheating on him in any way. It's just, duty and honor. And the other scene that kind of disturbed me a little bit was it's like all the handmaids together. It's one of their few kind of little ceremonies that they have. They have a few in the book, kind of there and there. The birthing scene is one of them. But the other one was the stoning of the guy. That was kind of, I don't know, because I understand how they would kind of view rape in this culture. They would definitely see it as wrong, which we do today too. But it's definitely an eye for an eye society. I mean, they use quotes like underneath his eye, things like that, which really show the importance of this punishment style, which is an eye for an eye, which is pretty much you do something, I do something equal or worse to you. So they pretty much take this man that they've been accused of raping this handmaid and they stone him to death. That's pretty much it. But the important thing is the only way that these handmaids get any type of information on either other handmaids or just society in general is these kind of events, because before the event starts, they talk to each other. You find out that Offred's friend might even be dead. That was another handmaid, which is really important because, she loses her motivation throughout this book. Because she starts off with thinking, okay, my husband is dead. My kid's been taken away from me. I'm in this handmaid situation where I pretty much have to bear another child. And I'm, and it kind of goes from downhill to downhill for her. Obviously, she finds out later that her friend is still alive. She's at this nightclub that the commander takes her to. But it's one of those stories that that it's not going to have a happy ending. And it kind of sucks because, like, at the end of the book, like the epilogue part, they kind of tell you, oh, finally, after I think it's like 20 years or something, Gilead's dead. And then it's like, okay, that's nice, but I've been following this character Offred's story for like 200 pages, and I kind of want to know what happened to her. And they really don't tell you. So that's kind of why I'm kind of excited a little bit for season 3 to kind of see kind of what happened to Offred, because the book doesn't really say. And then you obviously get the feeling with some of the other handmaids that are doing their thing, that there is a resistance. There is a resistance coming. And the unfortunate thing is they don't. This would be a really interesting part to like have like this side story of the resistance, which they kind of do in season 2 a little bit. They kind of focus on other characters. Hold on, guys. I'm gonna do a look up here. I can't remember her name. But um her name's not on here, guys. Well, it's the Laxus Black Bedell character that gets a little bit more focus in the later season 2. And I thought she was actually a more interesting character than June, because I think, one, she's trying to start a rebellion, and to me that's a little bit more interesting than June kind of going with the flow. I feel like June might be a little bit older than this other handmaid. I'm not completely positive. They don't really go over the ages or timelines or anything. You kind of just have June and she's kind of just telling her story. But at the same time, like, I can understand. I mean, you have June kind of like working through things. It's not like she's gonna stop and be like, "Oh, how old are you?" And then you have the girl that loses her eye, and oh my goodness, I can, like, it was shocking in the book. Don't get me wrong, it was very shocking in the book, but when you watch it in the show, oh my goodness, you're like, the girl does not have an eye. And it's kind of creepy. And she's like the one that you have the ceremony with. She ends up being pretty much psycho, which I think is more realistic to, I think, how a lot of people would respond to this situation. Is a little more psycho, a little bit more, okay, I'm gonna like try to fight the man, I'm gonna try to get out, which June tries to get out of this situation, but like, she doesn't fight it either, which I think is because she's trying to get her daughter back and everything, but at the same time, there's there's so much non-resistance that this book is actually kind of creepy in a lot of ways, because there's no non-resistance. Like, they're not fighting to, get out of the situation, which I would definitely, like, the only others, you can go and pick up waste, and that's the other way you can solve your problem. Is you could fight the resistance and then you pick up waste and then you die. So, I mean, I would be trying to get to Canada, which is like kind of the safe haven, which is funny because Margaret Atwood's from Canada, and then, she has America that, she's pretty much, kind of saying some bad stuff about. But it's like, at the same time, if you look at a map of Gilead, it's not all of the United States. They just kind of, unfortunately, these women kind of got into a situation where they lived in the area of Gilead and they could bear babies, so they became handmaids. Was kind of what the situation is. So you could, I mean, everybody's trying to get to Canada. That's like the true safe haven. And the other thing I kind of found, I wouldn't say disturbing, but something that was definitely missing, was the idea of how would other countries view this. They kind of have, like, they kind of have a scene where two Chinese, Oriental people, like, there's a group of them, that kind of, like, make a thing, like, oh my goodness, like, this is so exciting, I'm actually meeting a handmaid, where you do get a scene, like, from somebody from Mexico kind of saying about the same thing in the show, but you really don't get the opinions of what, like, everybody else thinks, because, I mean, when a lot of other countries look at America, they see freedom, and obviously this is not based off of freedom. This is making women bear children when they don't want to, and to me, it's a sexual object thing, and it's not anything else but being a sexual object and being an object to make babies. And I don't know what it would be like if, pollution got so bad where we would be put in this situation. like I said a couple of times in this video, yeah, we could be put in this situation. It's not, that's what's so scary about this book and the show is there is a possibility. It's a very high, I mean, a low possibility. I think we would figure out other ways to solve our problems. Other countries, Margaret Atwood like kind of mentions it in her interviews. Other countries have tried to do this in other different ways. Just more like influencing women to get pregnant and stuff. And then you have the idea of religion, which is going back to Puritanism, which is if nobody knows who's watching this video about Puritans and their views, go read the Scarlet Letter. It's a very good time. But yeah, it was a very harsh Catholic religion. I would say it's more extreme than the actual Catholic religion. It's pretty much, they definitely take the eye for an eye. They're the ones that, if you hear about the Salem witch trials, that was the Puritans. That was their views on everything. They're pretty much like, if you're a good person, you'll go to heaven. If you do one bad thing, you'll go to hell. And it's a very harsh religion, and that's pretty much, when you're looking at the clothing and kind of what these people look like, it's a very Puritanism. I actually thought, I mean, the Handmaids definitely look like they're very much Puritanism, but I felt like the rest of the costumes, I'm talking about the show now, the rest of the costumes very felt like the 1950s. Obviously, suits have been around forever. Like, suits have been around for a while, so there's not really a decade that I can put. But what Serena Joy wears in the show is very 1950s to me, which is another decade where women are pretty much house people. They take care of the house, they have the babies. That's kind of what they do. And you kind of get that in the show, but the only difference between maybe a woman from the 1950s and what kind of Serena Joy is that she had the education. So you're pretty much taking a lot of women that had like major education, and you're pretty much saying, oh, okay, well, just in order that you had an education, which is very hard to do. I mean, I've been in school, I have a BA in psychology, and I couldn't imagine somebody just saying, oh, okay, well, I don't care if you can read, right? Well, all you're going to do is make babies. And that's kind of what the situation is in this book, is you're taking a whole bunch of women that have this education, have this need, work their butts off, and you're pretty much telling them, oh, that's cool, that was fun, did you have a good time? Well, this is what you're going to do now, because this is what the government's telling you to do. And the idea of all of this is to make the world better, and this is kind of mentioned in the show, I'll kind of glance over it, because this is kind of, it's important to think about when you're thinking about, okay, so these women are having kids now, but what's going to happen in, let's say about 18 years, because, then their kids that they're having. And Serena kind of mentions this at a council meeting, like, hey, what's going to happen to our babies, our girls? And obviously, it's not mentioned either in the book or the show, not yet, because obviously we haven't jumped to that point in time in either case. But we assume, like, I'm going to assume if they can bear children, they're going to be handmaids. If they can't, then obviously they're going to be sold off to a very wealthy man, and have a handmaid of their own, and then the cycle continues until somebody breaks the cycle, of course, because that's kind of how that works. Usually, you have generational, stuff, they're probably taught, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, this is the Puritan way, this is the Gilead way, and Gilead's the only thing that's right in this world. Which, yes, it's another governmental platform, and a lot of people are like, don't down the government, don't. But in this case, I would be like, okay, government, I think we need to figure out a different way than Gilead, because Gilead's not working for everybody here. And the idea that you would pass this on is like the scariest thing. And I might do maybe like a review on like a couple episodes on season 2, because pretty much season 1 and the book kind of match up. It's kind of when you get into season 2, you're like, oh, okay, so we're kind of surpassed the book. We can look at the book, but yeah, we're past the book. And you kind of see the importance, you kind of see more of the form of Gilead. And I think that, to me, is the most important thing, was the form of Gilead and how they created these rules and how they were able to form Gilead, than June's story. Like, June's story is great. I love June. I feel for her, like, every page I read and every ceremony that she shares and some of her other things that she experiences. I do feel for her, but at the same time, I would rather, like, sit here and, like, hear about how Gilead was formed. Margaret Atwood, if you're, if you ever listen to this, can you write a book about how Gilead was formed? Because I would really like to know. It was like something that was lingering in my mind. It's like the psychology of how you would have to change like a whole group of people, which it's happened before. This is nothing extreme, and Margaret Atwood explains this in like a lot of interviews that you watch or you would read, that a lot of this stuff that she talks about is very realistic. It's happened before. It will happen again. And that's just kind of the scary part of this book, is that there is parts of this book that had happened. Not in America, but in other countries. I mean, the Puritans were here. They landed on one of the boats, took Salem, Massachusetts, and pretty much burned a whole bunch of people. I mean, that actually legit happened. And to take what Puritanism is and create a whole nother society is like a really scary thing. I mean, I remember reading the Scarlet Letter. I remember reading The Crucible. They're not scary books. Like, they're not like horror, like in your face horror or anything, but they definitely show the horrible condition of the human condition. And that's kind of what this book does too, is that shows what a human is willing to do to another human to survive. And this book is definitely a survival story. I mean, we don't know if June lives or not. That's another thing that, we'll probably see in the 3rd season, is if June survives or not and what happens to June. I'm not thinking it's going to be a happy story. I'm not thinking like June is going to get back with, going to get, a happy ending. She could. She could end up with Nick. They could go to Canada and they could live happily ever after. But I don't know. The book doesn't say anything. The TV show so far hasn't said too much. Like I said, I don't want to ruin too much of season 2, because it's definitely an extension of the story. Probably what a lot of readers probably that read this in 1985 did not think they were going to get. They didn't think they were going to probably get their ending that they wanted. But yeah, so if you like this video, like and subscribe and leave a comment, and you guys have a wonderful day.